The glass doors of Luminary Gems swung shut with a chime that felt like a gunshot. Marcus Ellison, the man who built this empire, stood in his own store, invisible in plain sight. He adjusted his tailored navy suit, the kind that screamed success, and scanned the glittering display cases. The store was his pride, a monument to years of grit, built from a single pawnshop loan into a chain that sparkled across 5 states. Yet here he was, heart-pounding, not from pride but from the sting of being sized up like a thief. The new manager, a wiry man named Greg with a pinched smile, hovered near the counter, his eyes darting between Marcus and the exit. "Can I help you, sir?" Greg's voice carried an edge, the kind that implied you don't belong here. Marcus caught the undertone, familiar as an old scar. He'd heard it in boardrooms, at galas, even in his own stores. But today it hit harder. This was his store. His name was etched in the damn logo. "I'm just looking," Marcus replied, keeping his tone even, though his pulse thrummed. He stepped toward a case of diamond necklaces, their facets catching the light like tiny stars. A young employee, Sarah, barely out of college, lingered nearby, her hands fidgeting with a polishing cloth. She glanced at Greg, then at Marcus, her uncertainty palpable. Greg cleared his throat. "These are high-end pieces. Maybe you'd prefer something more affordable." His words hung in the air, sharp and deliberate. A couple browsing nearby turned their heads, sensing the shift in the room. Marcus's jaw tightened. He could have bought the entire case-hell, the entire store without blinking. But Greg didn't know that. Or maybe he did and chose to ignore it. "I'll decide what I can afford," Marcus said, his voice low but laced with steel. He leaned closer to the case, pointing at a sapphire pendant. "Tell me about this one." Greg hesitated, his smile faltering. "That's a limited edition piece. Very exclusive. We usually show it to established clients." The implication landed like a slap. Sarah's eyes widened, and she busied herself with the cloth, avoiding the scene. The couple in the corner whispered, their stares prickling Marcus's skin. He straightened, meeting Greg's gaze. "Exclusive, huh? Funny, considering I signed off on its design." The words dropped like a grenade, but Greg didn't flinch. Instead, he doubled down. "Sir, I'm going to need to see some ID if you're serious about purchasing." Greg's tone was now openly hostile, his hand inching toward the phone on the counter, as if ready to call security. The air thickened, every eye in the store locked on the standoff. Sarah froze, the cloth dangling from her hand. The couple backed away, clutching their bags. Marcus laughed, a sharp, bitter sound that echoed off the glass. "ID? In my own store." He spread his arms, gesturing to the polished floors, the gleaming cases, the logo emblazoned on the wall. "You're standing in my house, and you're asking for my ID?" Greg's face paled, but he didn't back down. "I don't know who you think you are, but we have policies. Everyone gets checked. No exceptions." His voice wavered, betraying a flicker of doubt, but his stance held firm. Sarah's mouth opened, then closed, her eyes darting between the two men like she was watching a car crash in slow motion. Marcus's chest tightened, not with fear but with a rage he'd spent years learning to cage. He'd clawed his way up from nothing, born in a neighborhood where dreams were more likely to get you killed than make you rich. He'd faced down skeptics, investors who sneered at his ambition, competitors who whispered he'd fail. But this, being profiled in the one place he'd built to prove them wrong, it was a betrayal that cut deeper than any boardroom slight. "Call your district manager," Marcus said, his voice calm but carrying a weight that made Sarah flinch. "Do it now." Greg smirked, mistaking Marcus's restraint for weakness. "I don't need to call anyone. If you're not here to buy, I suggest you leave before this gets messy. The word messy landed like a spark in dry grass. Marcus stepped closer, his presence commanding the room. Messy? You have no idea what messy looks like. His eyes locked on Greg's, unyielding. But you're about to find out. Sarah gasped, dropping the cloth. The couple in the corner edged toward the door, their whispers now audible. Is that the owner? One murmured. Greg's smirk faltered, his hand frozen above the phone. For the first time, uncertainty flickered in his eyes. Marcus didn't break eye contact. You think you know who belongs here? You think you can judge me by my skin and decide I don't measure up? His voice rose, not in volume but in intensity, each word a blade. I built this place from nothing. Every case, every gem, every light in this room exists because I made it happen. And you're telling me I need to prove myself to you? The store fell silent, the only sound the faint hum of the air conditioning. Sarah's face was a mask of shock, her hands trembling. Greg's mouth worked, but no words came. The couple stood rooted, their eyes wide with realization. Marcus's words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of a lifetime spent fighting to be seen. Greg swallowed hard, his bravado crumbling. I didn't know, he stammered. You didn't say. Didn't say? Marcus cut him off, his voice sharp enough to slice through the tension. I shouldn't have to announce who I am to walk into my own store. You saw me and decided I was less. That's on you. Sarah stepped forward, her voice barely a whisper. Mr. Ellison, I'm so sorry. I didn't. Don't, Marcus said, holding up a hand. His eyes softened slightly, but the fire in them didn't fade. You didn't make the call, but you stood by and let it happen. That's a choice too. The weight of his words settled over the room like dust after an explosion. Greg's face was ashen, his hands gripping the counter as if it were the only thing keeping him upright. The couple slipped out, the door chiming softly behind them. Sarah's eyes glistened, her guilt plain as day. Marcus turned back to Greg. You're going to call the district manager now, and then we're going to have a conversation about what exclusive really means. Greg nodded, fumbling for the phone, his hands shaking. Sarah looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. The store, once a beacon of Marcus's success, felt like a battlefield. The air thick with the aftermath of a war no one saw coming. But this wasn't the end. Marcus knew that. He'd faced worse than this, far worse, and come out stronger. The real question was what came next, not just for Greg or Sarah, but for the store, the company, and the legacy he'd fought so hard to build. He took a deep breath, steadying himself. The fight wasn't over. It was just beginning. As Greg dialed, his voice barely audible, Marcus walked to the display case, his fingers brushing the glass over the sapphire pendant. It was more than a piece of jewelry. It was a symbol of everything he'd overcome, and he wasn't about to let any one employee, manager, or otherwise dim its shine. The phone call connected, and a voice crackled through the line. Marcus didn't look at Greg. He didn't need to. He'd already won this round. But the bigger battle, the one against the assumptions and biases that had followed him his whole life, was far from over. He turned to Sarah, who was still standing frozen, her eyes red. You want to make this right? He asked, his voice softer now, but no less firm. Start by listening. Not just to me, but to everyone who walks through that door. You never know who's standing in front of you. Sarah nodded, tears spilling over. Greg hung up the phone, his face a mask of defeat. The district manager was on her way. The store was about to learn a lesson it wouldn't forget. Marcus stepped back, his gaze sweeping the room. This was his empire, his legacy, and he'd be damned if he let anyone make him feel like an outsider in it again. The door chimed as another customer entered, oblivious to the storm that had just passed. Marcus straightened his tie, his resolve hardening. He wasn't just fighting for himself. He was fighting for every person who'd ever been judged before they could speak, dismissed before they could prove themselves. And he wasn't done yet. The district manager, Elaine Carter, arrived within the hour, her heels clicking sharply against the polished floor. Marcus stood by the sapphire pendant's case, his posture calm but unyielding, like a general surveying a battlefield. The store had emptied of customers, the earlier tension driving them away, leaving only the hum of the lights and the weight of what had unfolded. Greg stood behind the counter, his face a mix of dread and defiance, while Sarah hovered near the back, her eyes red but attentive, as if trying to absorb every moment to understand where she'd gone wrong. Elaine, a seasoned professional with a reputation for fixing messes, took one look at the scene and knew this was no ordinary complaint. She extended a hand to Marcus, her expression neutral but her eyes sharp. "Mr. Ellison, I'm deeply sorry for any misunderstanding. Can we discuss this privately?" Marcus shook her hand, his grip firm.
"No misunderstanding, Elaine."
"And no private office. We're talking right here." His voice carried the same quiet authority that had built Luminary Gems from a dream into a reality. Elaine nodded, sensing the line in the sand. She turned to Greg. "Explain." Greg shifted, his earlier bravado replaced by a nervous stammer. "I was following protocol. We check IDs for high-value items. It's policy. I didn't know who he was." His eyes flicked to Marcus, then away, as if meeting his gaze would burn. Elaine's brow furrowed. "Policy doesn't mean profiling, Greg. You've worked here 6 weeks. You're telling me you didn't recognize the CEO?" Greg's mouth opened, then closed. Sarah stepped forward, her voice shaky but clear. "He didn't ask for ID from the couple who left earlier. They were looking at the same case." Her words landed like a stone in still water, rippling through the room. Greg's face flushed, his hands clenching. Marcus raised an eyebrow, his gaze locking on Greg. "That true?" Greg sputtered. "It's not I wasn't, they were regulars. I knew them." "You knew them," Marcus repeated, his tone deceptively calm. "But you didn't know me, even though my face is on every company memo, every annual report. Even though I walked in here like I owned the place because I do." Elaine's expression hardened. "Greg, you're on administrative leave, effective immediately. We'll review this with HR." Greg's jaw dropped, but before he could protest, Elaine raised a hand. "Not another word. Go." Greg grabbed his jacket, his movements jerky, and stormed toward the door. It slammed behind him, the chime jarring in the silence. Sarah flinched, her hands twisting together. Elaine turned to her. "Sarah, you're not off the hook. You saw this happen and didn't intervene." "Why?" Sarah's voice cracked. "I was scared. I thought he'd handle it. I didn't want to make it worse." Tears welled up again, but she didn't look away. "I'm sorry, Mr. Ellison. I should have said something." Marcus studied her, his expression unreadable. "You're young, Sarah. You've got time to learn. But silence isn't neutral. It's a side." She nodded, swallowing hard, her face a map of regret. Elaine exhaled, rubbing her temple. "Marcus, I'll ensure this is addressed company-wide. Training, policy reviews, whatever it takes. This won't happen again." Marcus shook his head. "It's not about training, Elaine. It's about people. You can't train out prejudice. You have to confront it." He gestured to the empty store. "This isn't just about me. It's about every customer who walks in here and gets judged before they open their mouth. You fix that, Or this company's nothing but glass and glitter? Elaine nodded, her face grim. I hear you. What do you want to do? Marcus didn't answer immediately. He walked to the window, looking out at the bustling street where people moved unaware of the war he'd just fought. He thought of his father, a janitor who'd worked nights to put him through school, who'd told him, "They'll try to make you small, son. Don't let them." He thought of the kid he'd been, dreaming of a world where his worth wasn't questioned. And he thought of the man he'd become, still fighting the same fight. I want change, he said finally, turning back to them. Not promises, not memos, real change, starting here. Over the next week, Marcus didn't just sit back and wait. He called a company-wide meeting, not in a boardroom but in the flagship store, right where it had happened. Every employee, from cashiers to executives, packed the floor. The sapphire pendant gleamed in its case, a silent witness. Marcus stood at the center. No podium, no notes, just him and the truth. I'm not here to lecture, he began, his voice carrying across the room. I'm here to tell you what it feels like to build something with your blood and sweat, only to be told you don't belong in it. He recounted the incident, sparing no detail, the suspicion in Greg's eyes, the weight of Sarah's silence, the sting of being reduced to a stereotype. The room was silent, some faces pale, others nodding, a few in tears. This isn't just my story, he continued. It's the story of anyone who's ever been judged by their skin, their accent, their clothes. If we're selling luxury, we're selling dreams. And dreams don't discriminate. So why do we? He laid out a plan. Not just sensitivity training, but a complete overhaul. Employees would rotate through every role, from stockroom to sales, to understand the business from the ground up. Customers would be invited to share their experiences anonymously, their feedback shaping policy. And every manager would be held accountable, not just for sales but for fairness. If you can't treat people right, he said, you're not selling my gems. You're selling out my legacy. Sarah was the first to speak up after, her voice trembling but resolute. I want to help. I messed up, but I want to be part of the change. Others followed, some hesitant, some passionate, offering ideas, admitting faults. Elaine took notes, her usual composure replaced by a quiet intensity. Marcus listened, not as a CEO but as a man who knew change started with honest voices. The story didn't stay in the store. A customer who'd witnessed the incident posted about it on X, their post going viral within hours. Black CEO humiliated in his own jewelry store. Staff had no idea who he was. This is America. The comments exploded, some outraged, some defending Greg, others debating whether Marcus should have revealed his identity sooner. Luminary Gems trended, not for its diamonds but for its drama. Marcus didn't shy away from the spotlight. He went on a local news show not to point fingers but to talk about the bigger issue. This isn't about one bad day, he said, his eyes steady on the camera. It's about a system that lets these days keep happening. We're fixing it at Luminary, but what about everywhere else? The response was overwhelming. Customers flooded the stores, some to buy, others to share their own stories of being profiled. Competitors issued statements, promising reviews of their own policies. Activists reached out, offering partnerships. Marcus didn't bask in the attention. He used it, channeling it into a foundation to support minority entrepreneurs, funded by a percentage of Luminary's profits. Back at the store, Sarah became a quiet force. She proposed a display featuring the stories of customers who'd overcome prejudice, their words etched on plaques beside the gems. Marcus approved it, and the first plaque told his story, ending with a question, "Who do you see when you look at me?" Greg didn't return. HR's investigation found a pattern of biased behavior, and his termination was swift. But Marcus didn't gloat. He knew one firing didn't fix the problem. The real work was in the long-haul changing minds, not just policies. Months later, the store felt different. Not perfect, but alive with purpose. Sales were up, but more importantly, so was trust. Customers lingered, sharing stories with staff who listened. Really listened. The sapphire pendant sold to a young woman who'd read about Marcus's stand. "It's not just a necklace," she told Sarah. "It's a reminder." Marcus stood in the store one evening. The lights dimmed, the cases glowing softly. He thought of his father, of the kid who'd dreamed big, of the man who'd refused to be small. The fight wasn't over, maybe it never would be, but he'd carved out a space where fairness had a chance. He locked up, the chime of the door a quiet promise. Tomorrow he'd keep fighting. For himself, for his company, for everyone who deserved to be seen. What would you have done in that store? Called it out, stayed silent, or something else? How do we balance justice with understanding in a world quick to judge?